Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video 141, Blood and Soil, Ethnic Heathenism, which is something that it takes off of Spengler's work, among other things, sort of the Heathen Manifesto stuff. It's an interesting concept. It's the idea heathenism is more on the strictly paganistic side than it has anything specifically to do with the occult, as in, witchy stuff, witch lore, or something like that. But magic was always part of paganism, and in that sense, folk magic and sort of folk tales, the mythological side of it, of the occult, which is twain, in my opinion, often with real history. There's at least a kernel of truth to most mythology, even this really out there stuff. You can talk about ancient aliens if you want. I'm not going to do that. But I believe that there is some truth to these tales. That material is all woven together. And within the ethnic heathenism, the sort of blood and soil style thing, it goes into the racial and to the tribal. Now, I would point out, if you read some Victorian literature, which itself has nothing to do with heathenism in an ethnic sense, has nothing to do with nationalism per se. If you read, for instance, The Occult Significance of Blood by Rudolf Steiner, you'll find that the idea of racial memory and tribalism and the eugenics, to an extent, were quite common even in that era of writing, both in Europe and the United States. And it also overlapped with science. Early anthropology. The first course in anthropology ever taught within the United States was taught at the University of Vermont. I've been in the actual building where it was taught, which hasn't really been renovated since that same era. It's kind of a weird little building in the middle of campus. It's like right near the science building. So you've got this like brutalist lecture hall attached to the sort of the chemistry building where they do a lot of the science labs and stuff. It's like total brutalism. It looks like it could be in the Soviet Union. Then on the other side you have the very Victorian looking library. It's very sprawling and everything. And then you have this little sort of cottage-looking house with a little tower on top of it and everything. And that's where some of the, I think a couple of the basic English and anthro courses are taught. But that's actually the birthplace of American anthropology, more or less. And it's also the last holdout of eugenics within the United States. This is not a coincidence. Well into the 1970s, UVM was still involved with this sort of thing. The state of Vermont was one of the last holdouts of eugenics within the United States, specifically related to some of the Native American populations here and within the region. Blood and soil ethnic heathenism, though, is more ancient. You're talking about an overarching sort of tribal system, which encompasses every aspect of it. It encompasses politics. It would, of necessity, encompass science to a degree where it's going to be present in such a culture. It certainly encompasses the historical lore, and it also encompasses the strictly religious, spiritual / mythological side of a culture. Now, do I support the idea of ethnic heathenism? Yes. If somebody is in a place in the world, this would be the case for most of Europe, where ethno-state principles were used for thousands of years, where people were part of a tribe, it was part of a sort of tribal nation, we're talking pre-Rome usually, and then eventually amalgamated into a cultural enclave with greater political organization and became more of a modern nation state. Wherever you're talking about that sort of thing, people, for thousands of years in many cases, sometimes longer, have had it ingrained into them that that's the way to do business. That the people have a tribal lineage, they have a tribal system, they have their own folklore, they have their own folk cuisine and everything else under the sun. They certainly have their own religion. If you look at Europe, you're looking at a patchwork of these different things. In those situations, ethnic heathenism makes sense. If there's going to be a pagan revival, it will be an ethnic pagan revival. Just the same as if you have a pagan revival in some part of Africa, chances are it's going to be a tribal African population practicing some traditional African religion, some animist system or ancestor worship or something. It'd be the same in parts of Asia. You'd have a revival of an essence of paganism. It would tie into the folklore. It probably would be nationalistic. When we look at Nazi Germany, the big boogeyman that everyone talks about When they think about nationalism at all, they immediately regress to talking about specifically the German Nazi Party. Has nothing to do with anything here, by the way. That's what they talk about. What were they surmising before, in the run-up to the Nazi Party taking hold there? Originally, it was an ethnic heathen movement. It had pagan trappings. It had mystic trappings. It tied into then what was considered, semi-modern lore about Atlantis. It tied into science, especially within the archaeological sense, taking off of anthropology, the idea of trying to discover sort of the origins of your racial system, the origins of your ethnicity, your culture, your state at large, trying to look at the past and and theorize about it, essentially. And I consider that to be a positive thing. Later on, you get the more pragmatic, militaristic side, the expansionism. That's sort of separate, though, from the ethnic heathenism. In fact, some of the proponents of that original sort of eugenic-era model were oppressed by the Nazi Party. We're talking some of the secret societies there, or not-so-secret societies, so the gentleman's club side. They were suppressed. Hitler actually attempted to exterminate the same occultists that led to the sort of Volkish mentality that preceded the rise of the Third Reich. Actually went after those who had been involved in memetics, you might say, at the time, because they were a threat. And that's naturally what will happen. By the way, if you ever get an autocratic system that rises up as a result of occultism, the first thing it'll do is try to suppress or control all of those occultists. Any occultist that was not an early member of whatever group has seized power will not be trusted, because it'll be recognized that that ties right in. If the government there is wise, not necessarily moral, but wise, if it's good at strategy, it's going to attempt to crush those people, because that's where you get your real masters of propaganda. It's where you get people who can garner large audiences, potentially, because they're talking about things that are ingrained, they're innate within the human spirit. Namely, mythology. Why are we here? How did we get here? Why? What are we supposed to do now? How do we reform culture and make it bigger and better in every way? How do we discover sort of how do we trace our lineage, our genealogy? If you read some of these manifestos, from The Voice of Our Ancestors by Wolf Sorensen would be a good example. You can see that there was a lot of social alienation at the time. The first wave of globalism preceded the Second World War. Or I should say globalism light. The sort of same spirit of global identity politics preceded it. This divorced people from their genealogical histories, from their cultural histories, from their ethnic tribe. And so there was a lot of social alienation going on because people didn't really like that. It made some people feel uncomfortable. Sorensen is ruminating on pictures of his ancestry and saying, oh, they have such proud faces, but I don't really know anything about them. And I feel sort of lost. I feel divorced from this sort of mystic spirit of my tribal, my ethnic lineage. And you can understand how we see this today. Great example. Here's the funny part. What group of people in the world right now is most obsessed above all others with this same sort of thing? Israel. Oh, it's our homeland. We want to discover, we want accurate genealogies going back all the way to King David. We want our genealogies. We want to defend this culture. We certainly want to defend our mysticism, our gematria, our Kabbalah, and so forth. We will rebuild the temple. We have a religious and an ethnic reason to be here, and it's divine. That's what they feel. My question would be, why would it be negative if some other group of people is doing the same? What if the Germans had a pagan Volkish revival? I'm not talking about, oh, gas everyone who's foreign. I'm talking about an ethnic revival within the country in which they reclaim sort of that tribal lineage. They go back to their old rituals. They go back to their old philosophies. And as a result of that, they restore that sort of tribal memory. You could have the same thing, by the way, in a non-ethno state. If you're looking at the Americas, you're looking at states that have been, for some centuries, almost as soon as civilized people landed in the continents to begin with, and started building, sort of the territories and colonies that became nations here. they were mixed together, at least among European groups, as well as with the native cultures that were there. Slaves come over, that gets intermixed, and it's sort of a hodgepodge of humanity. But they can still have the only stand-in, and this informs my political beliefs. Because I'm not European or Asian or African, I can't really adopt the ethno-state principle. There wasn't an ethno-state here to adopt. Even the very early all-white settlers here were considered of different races when they were coming here in the first place. So you had a Scandinavian, you had an Anglo-Saxon from England or Wales or whatever, then you had an Irish person, you had some Italian, and someone from Poland and a Russian and all these groups. They were considered different races at the time. Now, of course, we refer to that more as ethnicity or nationality or something. But they were all mixed together. It's not like if you were to look at Europe, you can have this sort of pan-white ethno-state concept, but each individual ethnicity, the linguistic and ethnic groups would have to be separate under such tribalism. So you'd have a German people, you'd have a French people, you'd have an English people, you'd have an Italian people, maybe split in half, according to what the Northern Italians seem to want. You'd have a Greek people, and so forth. That's what you would have. You can have the togetherness, you can have the understanding and the peace and so forth, but those ethnic clads would be separate largely from one another. They wouldn't be generally intermixing under that particular model. But they've already mixed here. What we call a white American is a hodgepodge of different white groups, generally speaking. They may have mainly Italian or mainly German or mainly Irish background, but they've already been mixed together. For the most part, they're mixed individuals from multiple European backgrounds. Take a DNA test, you're living in the United States, chances are you're not 100% German, 100% English, 100% Irish or something. There's probably some other blood there. There's often Native American blood there too. 5 or 6 generations ago, a lot of people have a great-great-great-grandparent who was, half Cherokee or something like that. You can't really have the ethno-state model present there. That's why a lot of people, they talk about secession, they're like, oh, let's split up, let's have a white America, a black America, a Hispanic America, and stuff like that. I think that's a screwy idea. Over here, the stand-in is civic nationalism, but here's the secret, here's the key, and this is what held the United States together. You want to know a secret? Columbia, the goddess that we began to adopt here, it's a real religious system. The civic system overlapped and became a state religion of sorts. Very, very Roman style, and it worked. And it wasn't until we began abandoning this that we started having problems. I think if we just take those ideals, liberty and brotherhood and justice and so forth, subjugate them to a sort of pagan-style pantheon, and begin circulating civic nationalist literature enough and making enough songs and marching down the street. Yeah, we should have military marches too. Yeah, we'd be like in the next Rome in every essence. Things would be nicer than they are today. They would be. There'd be more respect, probably be less crime, and people could get along. But we can't really adopt the ethno-state principle in the ancient sense. Those cultures are ancient. Ours is only a few centuries old, but we can still have that civic culture. We can build it. We can make it. We just have to use a concerted effort for a few more centuries, and we'll have created basically our own American ethnicity of sorts. It would be a civic model. It is possible to do. But as far as people from the old world engaging in ethno-nationalism and overlapping that with some sort of tribal or folklore-laden system, yeah, you should. You should have that. I mean, it works for the Israelis, doesn't it? That's what they're doing. We're a Jewish nation. We have this history. Here are our genealogies. We've been here for, 5,000-6,000 years, supposedly. Well, there you go. That's exactly what they're doing. It's blood and soil heathenism. It's not Christianity. It's outside of that. I don't know why all the European and American Christians worry so about, like, nationalism of other stripes. Oh, paganism or something. The Jewish religion was partially informed by Babylonian tradition. So where's the problem? I don't quite understand it. I think that we should adopt that. And yeah, we should defend our cultures. Whether it's a civic culture or it's an ethnic culture, it doesn't really make a huge difference. That's about all. Peace out.